It wasn't fancy. Just a piece of cedar wood I cut myself, weather-sealed and hand-painted in bold black letters. Dangerous curve, slow down. I posted it 3 feet from the ditch where Angela's car had flipped 7 years ago. Right outside our house where the county road curled like a fishhook, blind and tight, especially when wet. The county never installed a proper warning, maybe because no one had died there until Angela. She was driving home late from her shift at the hospital, exhausted. They said it was raining, that she swerved, that she overcorrected. But I didn't need the accident report to know what had happened. I'd seen that curve cause enough near misses to make my stomach drop. I'd warned people for years. But I wasn't anyone important then. Just a husband, a dad, a man with too much pain in his throat and not enough ways to get it out. So I carved a sign, planted it myself, buried the post 2 feet deep, mixed my own concrete, and set it under a blood orange sky, while my son Lucas held the flashlight. He was only 10, then silent, too grown in the eyes. We didn't speak a word that night. We didn't need to. The sign wasn't just a warning. It was a grave marker. It was love. It was grief made wood and paint and purpose. For years, no one touched it. In fact, people slowed down. Neighbors even thanked me. Delivery drivers waved. It gave me a quiet sense of peace, knowing it might save a life, even if it hadn't saved hers. Then the HOA came. When we first moved here, this stretch of land wasn't under any HOA jurisdiction. We were just outside their border, grandfathered into the community, but not technically governed. But things change. New developments push boundaries, new board members redraw maps, and suddenly I found myself inside the Grove at Meadow Glen HOA lines, without voting rights, but still under their thumb. They said it was about unifying aesthetics, about preserving property value, about visual continuity and branding. But what they meant was control. The first letter arrived in April, a tidy envelope in my mailbox, with the Grove's elegant logo, a silver leaf embossed on navy blue. Inside, "Dear resident, our recent neighborhood compliance walkthrough identified your sign as a violation of Meadow Glen's visual standards and landscape cohesion requirements. HOA Regulation 7.3b prohibits the installation of unauthorized signage visible from the public road. You are hereby requested to remove the sign within 14 days to avoid penalties." I read it 3 times, heart thudding harder each round. I called the number listed, got a voicemail. I wrote an email, no reply. I showed up at the next HOA board meeting. Waded through 90 minutes of landscaping discussions, pool access codes, and a woman complaining about a neighbor's Halloween lights still being up in February. When they finally gave me the floor, I held up a photo of Angela. The crash site, the twisted car, the coroner's timestamp. I told them everything. The woman at the head of the table, Karen Riston, HOA president, clasped her hands like she was praying and nodded politely. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, tone flat. "But we still have to follow the standards. Otherwise, we make exceptions for everyone." Another board member, Brad Whitmore, the treasurer, added with a smirk. "Besides, there haven't been any other accidents there, right?" I couldn't even breathe. They voted 5-0 to uphold the violation. Back home, I sat on the porch for hours. Lucas, now 17, came out and offered me a cold can of ginger ale. He didn't say much, just sat beside me. I knew he remembered the sign like I did, not as a nuisance, as a boundary, a marker between tragedy and peace. "They can't take it," I said quietly, "not without a fight." I sent them documentation, filed an appeal, attached weather data curve ratings, police reports, and signed statements from neighbors who agreed the sign had slowed traffic. I even found an old email from the county transportation department admitting that the curve was higher than average risk but not prioritized due to budget constraints. Still, the reply came quickly. Appeal denied. Final notice: the sign must be removed by June 3rd. If not, HOA maintenance crews will remove it, and the cost will be charged to your property account. Charged to me for destroying my wife's memory. I considered chaining myself to the post, calling the news, filing a restraining order. But I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had, the crash wouldn't have happened. But I didn't know they'd act so fast. I didn't know June 3rd meant June 3rd at 9:06 a.m. That morning, I was upstairs tightening the handle on the hall closet when Lucas yelled, "Dad, they're out front." I looked through the window and saw them 2 HOA maintenance trucks parked on the shoulder, 2 men in reflective vests. One of them already walking toward the sign with a pry bar. I ran outside barefoot, the porch steps stinging my feet. "Stop, that sign's not hurting anyone." The worker glanced at me, then at his clipboard. "Just doing what we're told." He yanked once, then twice, the concrete cracking as the post gave way. Lucas stood beside me, fists clenched. The other man tossed the sign into the bed of the truck like it was junk wood. "Where are you taking it?" I asked. They didn't answer. They got in, slammed the doors, and pulled out. And then, barely 5 minutes later, came the sound I'll never forget. Tires screeching, a horn, then a sickening crunch. Lucas and I turned our heads in unison. Down the street, just past the curve, smoke was curling into the air. A white HOA security SUV was crumpled against the side of a dark sedan. Someone screamed. Someone else ran. And all I could think was, "You took away the warning, and now look." The flashing lights arrived less than 10 minutes after the crash. Sheriff's deputies, a fire truck, 2 ambulances, and another HOA security vehicle. Karen Riston showed up in a sleek black BMW, stepping out in heels too high for the gravel shoulder, her HOA badge swinging like a pendulum over her blazer. She didn't look at me at first. She was too focused on the wreck. The white HOA security SUV was caved in on the driver's side. The other vehicle, a black unmarked Dodge Charger, had its front end buried in a ditch. The airbags had gone off. I could see someone slumped behind the wheel being helped out by EMTs. They moved slowly, carefully. My stomach sank. That's when Karen finally looked at me. She didn't approach like a neighbor or a leader. She walked like a prosecutor headed into closing arguments. "Did you see what happened?" she asked coldly. "I heard it," I replied. "After your guys tore down my sign." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not seriously suggesting that sign would have prevented this?" I didn't answer, because I was suggesting exactly that. The curve was barely visible if you didn't know it was coming. That was the whole point of the sign. Angela didn't know. Neither apparently did the driver of that Charger. The sheriff's deputy on the scene took statements. I gave mine simple and direct. I told him what I'd seen when the sign was removed and how long after that the accident occurred. The deputy nodded, didn't say much, and moved on. Karen kept her distance the rest of that morning, but I noticed her speaking to Brad Whitmore, the treasurer, in hushed tones near the HOA security SUV. He looked shaken pale. I would find out later that the security driver, a man named Julian Norris, had fractured his collarbone. The other driver had it worse. The man in the unmarked Charger, he was an undercover officer with the State Patrol, a sergeant. He had been on routine surveillance. When they loaded him into the ambulance, his face was streaked with blood and his neck braced in rigid foam. I felt the chill in my spine settle into something heavier. By the next day, the HOA had issued a statement. It arrived by email at 6:17 a.m. To all residents of The Grove at Meadow Glen. We regret to inform you of a vehicular accident involving one of our valued security personnel. The incident occurred near the western curve, on Red Pine Road, currently under investigation. We have been made aware that an unauthorized road sign previously placed by a homeowner may have contributed to confusion regarding appropriate signage. Said sign was in violation of HOA Regulation 7.3b and was removed accordingly. We remind all residents that signage must be approved by the board. Private installation of visual elements near public roadways presents liability risks and visual dissonance. The HOA will continue to ensure safety and compliance through appropriate channels. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Unauthorized sign. Visual dissonance. No acknowledgement that it had been a safety warning. No mention that it had stood for years and likely prevented more than one accident. Just a dry dismissal. A legal pivot. And worst of all, they implied I had caused confusion. Lucas stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. "They're trying to blame you," he said. I nodded. "I know. They can't, right?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, they could try. They had attorneys, insurance, influence. I had a garage full of tools, a faded folder of old crash data, and a 17-year-old son who deserved better than to watch his father get steamrolled by a suburban junta. Later that morning, Brad Whitmore showed up in a khaki polo with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. Clipboard in hand, he knocked on the door with a forced smile. "Hi, Mr. Jennings. Just wanted to follow up regarding the signage compliance issue. The sign you tore down, I said. Well, yes, the sign. I just need your signature here to confirm that the removal has been acknowledged and no further violation exists. He extended the clipboard like it was a peace offering. I didn't take it. Brad hesitated. There's also an assessment fee for the removal. Materials labor disposal comes to $212.50. That's on your property ledger now. Lucas stepped beside me. Are you serious? Brad glanced at him, then back to me. Look, I know this has been emotional, but the board's hands are tied. We have to enforce the standards or the whole system breaks down. People start painting their houses purple, putting flamingos in their yard, stringing up holiday lights in July. I took a slow breath. You tore down a warning that saved lives. Brad shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. That's not how it works. We can't make exceptions, even after what happened. There's an investigation pending. We don't know all the facts yet. I stared at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. You'll have the paperwork, he said quickly, setting the clipboard down on the porch railing. Just sign when you can. Then he turned and walked off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage with the old file folder on my lap, the one I'd kept since Angela's crash. Accident photos, skid mark measurements. Angela's autopsy summary still sealed. My hands trembled just holding it, but I opened it anyway. Inside was something I'd forgotten. I had a letter dated 7 years back from the county traffic office. I had written them after Angela died, asking for signage. They responded with an apology, said they'd assess the site. They never did. But the letter acknowledged the danger. It might be something, it might not. But it was more than the HOA had. I went to the shelf, dug out my old thumb drives. Somewhere in those files were dashcam clips from neighbors' near-miss footage I'd recorded, even a photo of my sign, catching headlights at night, proof that it was visible and effective. Lucas came into the garage, rubbing his eyes. You okay? Yeah, I said. I just need to remember what I know. He sat beside me on the floor. They're not going to win. No, I agreed. They're not. The next morning, I drove to the State Patrol office, asked to speak to someone about the accident, gave my name, explained that I had information. When I mentioned the injured officer, the receptionist paused. He's still in surgery, she said softly. I swallowed hard. Can you let someone know I'd like to help? She nodded. I left my name, my number, and the USB drive. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that tiny act of defiance, would start unraveling the entire story the HOA was trying to build. Because sometimes all it takes is one man who refuses to forget. It was 3 days after I left that USB drive with the State Patrol before I heard anything back. 3 long days of quiet tension where every HOA board member avoided my gaze when they passed me on the street. Brad didn't return with another clipboard. Karen didn't send another letter. But their silence wasn't peace, it was preparation. Then, just after 7 a.m., on a cloudy Thursday, I heard the low rumble of engines out front. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee heart already beating faster than it should. 2 HOA maintenance trucks pulled up, same as before. But this time, the men wore uniforms I didn't recognize, subcontractors probably. Outsourced muscle. One of them pulled out a new laminated order and nailed it to the utility pole across from my driveway. Notice of Compliance Enforcement. Per HOA Board. Vote 2022-504-117B. Unauthorized signage removal will proceed. Costs incurred will be charged to property owner. Interference may result in citation or referral to municipal authorities. They didn't knock, they didn't speak, they just got to work. And this time, they weren't just tearing down my sign. They walked along my front yard with measuring tapes noting the edge of my landscaping. They took photos of the solar lights I'd installed near the flower bed. One of them pointed at my mailbox, handcrafted a gift from Angela's father, and jotted something down. I approached them calmly. Can I help you with something? The shorter one looked up. You Jennings? Yeah. Just following removal protocol. HOA expansion zone includes this stretch now. You're expanding your enforcement to what my grass? He shrugged. I don't make the rules. I looked toward the curve where the sign used to be. Just empty grass and a shallow scar where the concrete base had been pried out. No temporary signage, no caution tape, no cones, nothing to replace what they'd removed. Just the same blind, dangerous turn. And you're not going to do anything about that, I asked, pointing. The taller worker glanced at it. Not our call. We just clear the violations. Do you know someone almost died there? They didn't answer. That night, I pulled out my old hard drive and plugged it into my computer. I hadn't looked at the crash reconstruction files since I left the department, but I still remembered the process, photos, measurements, angle of impact velocity, and more importantly, patterns. Angela wasn't the first, and now she wouldn't be the last. I created a new folder, HOA Incident 2025. Into it, I dragged every relevant file. The security truck crash, the timeline, the removal order, the time-stamped photo I took as they yanked the sign out. Lucas had caught the moment perfectly, HOA workers in mid-motion with the curve looming in the background. I labeled it Exhibit A. Lucas leaned over my shoulder. Are you going to sue them? I'm going to do better, I said. I'm going to expose them. That night, I started calling in favors. Not many people from my old unit still worked local crash scenes, but I knew a guy in the county's traffic division. I knew a woman in civil engineering who'd consulted on road safety audits. I called both. Told them what I had, told them what I needed. What are you hoping for? The engineer Teresa asked me over the phone. A formal statement. Something official that says, removing that sign increased the risk at that curve. She paused. That's going to be difficult. HOA roads are technically private easements unless the county has right-of-way jurisdiction. Do they? Not on the internal roads. But that curve is still county managed. I checked the map overlay last night. Another pause. You did your homework. I always do. She agreed to look at the footage. Promised to follow up with the state engineer's office if needed. Said it might take a few days. I didn't have a few days. Because the HOA was already preparing their next move. The next morning, I received a certified letter from a local law firm, Whitmore and Glassman, LLP. I recognized the name Brad Whitmore's cousin, no doubt. The letter accused me of deliberate interference with neighborhood infrastructure, claiming I had willfully erected a hazard that endangered both HOA security staff and the general public. They threatened civil litigation and demanded immediate payment for damages incurred due to unauthorized sign placement to the tune of all for $200. Lucas read it over my shoulder. They're suing you. They're threatening to, I said. Big difference. He frowned. They can file a suit. Doesn't mean they'll win. But what if they do? I didn't answer because I wasn't sure yet. Instead, I called my old mentor, Greg Martinez, retired state patrol investigator turned private crash analyst. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. We'd fallen out after Angela's accident, mostly because he tried to convince me to sue the county, and I couldn't bring myself to fight then. But this time was different. He picked up on the second ring. Greg, it's Daniel Jennings. Silence. Then, well, damn. You still breathing? Barely. He chuckled. What's wrong? I told him everything. From the HOA letters to the crash. From Angela's sign to the new lawsuit. When I finished, he let out a long breath. They're trying to corner you, he said. Yeah, and I need to make them regret it. I'll come by tomorrow. Bring everything you've got. I hung up and stared out the window. The curve looked peaceful in the dusk, deceptively so. That was always its trick. Angela used to say it reminded her of life. How it could look calm right before it slammed into you. The next day, Greg showed up in a flannel shirt and work boots, carrying his old field kit, like a soldier returning to battle. We spent 6 hours reconstructing both crashes, Angela's and the HOA's. He walked the stretch of road, took photos, measured slope and curvature, mapped sightlines. You were right to post a warning, he said flatly. Anyone with half a brain would have. He pointed to the shallow bend. No signage, no mirror, no lighting. If someone's not familiar with this road, they're flying blind. He opened his kit and began assembling a drone. Let's get the aerial, he said. I want a top-down comparison, before and after removal. Greg stayed until dusk. We logged everything. And then he looked at me. You ready to fight back, Danny? I've been ready since the day she died, I said. I just didn't know how. Greg nodded. Then let's burn them down, with evidence. That night, I sent the drone footage to Teresa. I created a second folder on my computer, HOA litigation track. And I added one more file, a copy of the letter threatening to sue me. I labeled it Exhibit B, intimidation attempt. They thought I would roll over, that I'd apologize, pay the fine, let them rewrite the story. But they'd forgotten who I was. I'd buried a wife, raised a son, rebuilt a life, and I had no intention of letting them bury the truth next. It was almost surreal how fast the piece shattered. Greg had just packed up his equipment and driven off when I heard the distant growl of tires, too fast, too loud for that stretch of road. I stepped onto the porch eyes, scanning the bend out of instinct. Nothing yet. But then there it was. A flash of white. An HOA security SUV came tearing around the corner way too wide, its rear tires catching loose gravel at the shoulder. The driver overcorrected and swung back into the lane, too late. At the same instant, a black sedan appeared from the opposite direction, just cresting the slight hill that hid the curve's true angle. It was one of those moments where time slows down. The vehicles closed the distance in a blink. No horns, no brakes, no chance. The sound was like steel thunder. A brutal crunch of metal. Folding metal, plastic shattering like bones glass, exploding outward in a silver mist. The HOA SUV twisted at impact and spun once-twice before slamming rear first into the shallow ditch beside the mailboxes. The black sedan unmarked, sleek took the full hit on the driver's side, launched halfway across the opposite lane, before coming to rest diagonally across the pavement. And then, silence. The kind that follows something too loud for the brain to process. Lucas came running out behind me. "Dad, I saw it," I said. We ran. I didn't think about anything except keeping my footing as we sprinted across the grass toward the wreckage. By the time we got there, a neighbor had already called 911. I could hear her voice on speakerphone. "Two-car collision. Yes, someone's bleeding." I approached the black sedan first. Its driver's side window was gone, shards of glass scattered like diamonds across the seat. The man inside was slumped against the airbag, head, bleeding chest, rising and falling fast and shallow. His badge was visible, clipped to his belt. State Patrol. Again. "Sir," I said, trying to stay calm. "Can you hear me?" He groaned, shifted slightly. His eyelids fluttered. I turned to the HOA vehicle. The driver's door had been crushed inward, but the man inside was moving, grimacing, swearing, one arm pinned under the steering wheel. "You okay?" I shouted. "My shoulder," he spat. "What the hell was that?" I looked back at the curve, at the clean stretch of grass where my warning sign had stood just 3 days before, and I felt a sick, quiet fury begin to rise. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. First responders arrived in waves, a fire engine, then 2 sheriff's units, then the ambulances. EMTs swarmed the scene, extracting the State Patrol officer carefully, with a neck brace and long spine board. He was conscious by then, barely. I stepped back as they worked. My heart thudded dully in my chest. Lucas stood beside me, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They did this," he muttered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Sheriff's deputies began taking witness statements. I gave mine again, time, position, speed, estimation, angle of approach. They nodded, asked measured questions, noted every word. But I could tell something shifted when I told them about the missing sign. "Wait," one of them said. "There was a sign here." "There was," I said, "until the HOA tore it out this week." He looked at the curve, then back at me. "Was it county posted?" "No, I made it myself, after my wife died right there." He blinked. "You're Daniel Jennings." The name carried weight, enough that he paused before finishing his notes. The next shift in atmosphere came when Karen Riston arrived. Her BMW rolled up slow, deliberate, as if she were attending a city council picnic rather than a fresh accident site. She stepped out in her usual HOA power uniform, navy blazer, pressed slacks, perfectly white blouse, and looked around like she was searching for someone to blame. She found me. "Mr. Jennings," she said, tone icy. "I hope you're not interfering." "Interfering?" I echoed, incredulous. "With what?" "The consequences of your decisions." She exhaled through her nose. "You're not authorized to speak on behalf of this community." "I live here. My wife died here. That gives me more authority than you'll ever have." A few deputies turned their heads at my raised voice. Karen smoothed her blazer. "The HOA has followed all legal procedures. The sign was unauthorized. We can't have individuals making unilateral decisions that affect road safety." "That's the whole point," I snapped. "The sign increased safety. It warned drivers about a blind curve your board didn't care enough to mark, and now someone else is bleeding in a ditch because of it." She stepped closer, dropping her voice. "You want to be careful how you speak about this publicly, Daniel. There are liability issues involved, for everyone." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a reality." I stared at her for a long beat. Then I turned to the deputy standing nearby. I want to file a formal complaint against the HOA for reckless endangerment. They removed a proven safety device and caused a crash. The deputy blinked. We'll note that in the report, sir. Karen's jaw tensed, but she said nothing more. Later that evening, after the wreckage was cleared and the road reopened, I sat on my porch with Greg. He'd driven back after hearing about the crash on his scanner. He didn't say anything at first, just sipped his coffee and watched the curve like it was alive. Finally, he spoke. You've got them. Not yet, I said, but I'm close. He nodded. That cop's gonna back your claim, especially when he learns the sign was removed days before. If he survives, he will, Greg said quietly. And when he does, you need to have your case ready. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I can't let them rewrite this, I said. I won't let them say this was just an unfortunate event, that it was nobody's fault. Greg stood. Then let's make sure they can't. The next morning, I filed a FOIA request with the county for all accident reports on Red Pine Road for the last 10 years. I also filed a public safety complaint with the Department of Transportation's Risk Mitigation Unit. And I began drafting a legal affidavit. I included photos, testimony, a time-stamped sequence showing the sign's removal and the crash's aftermath. Every word was a nail in the coffin. Every photo another brick in the wall of truth. I was no longer defending myself. I was prosecuting them. I should have known they wouldn't back down. Not after everything. Not after the wreck. Not after a state patrol officer was pulled bleeding from a crash their security caused on a road they'd made more dangerous with their own arrogance. But still, when the letter came, it hit harder than I expected. It arrived folded twice, in a pristine white envelope slid under my door sometime after sunset, like a calling card left by a coward. The HOA seal, silverleaf navy blue, stared up at me like a smug smirk. Lucas was sitting at the table when I opened it. I read it once, then again slower because my brain refused to believe the words the first time. Mr. Jennings. In light of recent events, the board of directors at the Grove at Meadow Glen has reason to believe that your unauthorized placement of private signage constitutes a contributing factor to the accident that occurred on June 6th. While the sign was removed prior to the incident, in accordance with HOA standards and municipal regulations, its prior existence may have created a false expectation of signage continuity for passing drivers, thus producing confusion and unsafe assumptions. Your disregard for visual uniformity and roadway guidelines poses an ongoing risk to our community. Therefore, we are issuing a cease and desist order against any future signage placement. Additionally, you will be held liable for any further damages, costs, or legal consequences that arise due to your unauthorized actions. We expect your full cooperation to ensure community safety and compliance. They even had the nerve to sign it with Karen Riston's cursive flourish and that little slogan she insisted on printing under her name. Protecting property. Preserving peace. I handed the letter to Lucas. He read it in silence, then looked up. They're blaming you, he said, his voice flat. They are. For confusing the driver. By trying to help people not die. I nodded. They're turning it inside out. That's insane. No, I said, it's calculated. This wasn't just misdirection. It was a legal maneuver, a twisted little dance to build a foundation of doubt. In court, confusion can be just as powerful as evidence. And if they could make me look like the one who introduced uncertainty, then the crash could be rebranded as a tragic coincidence. I'd seen it before, in courtrooms, in crash reports rewritten by insurance adjusters with better lawyers than hearts. It was always the quiet ones, the ones without power or patience for litigation, who ended up shouldering blame they didn't earn. But I was done being quiet. The next morning, I called Greg and filled him in. They're trying to flip the narrative, I said. Turn me into the hazard. He laughed bitterly. That's classic HOA warfare, death by paperwork. Only I'm not dying. No, he said. You're fighting. So we give them something they can't spin. That afternoon, I returned to the curve with a measuring wheel, a laser level, and a clipboard. Lucas helped me remap every detail of the turn lane width, shoulder clearance, visibility distances from both approaches. We timed how long it took to react to an oncoming car from each direction, standing where the driver would first see the bend. Then I pulled up dashcam footage from the accident day. It showed the HOA vehicle speeding too fast for residential limits, and the black sedan appearing only a second later with no time to react. I paused the footage exactly at the point where my sign would have stood. See that I pointed to the screen? That's the moment. That's where the sign would have given the driver 4 more seconds. 4 seconds to brake. 4 seconds to avoid impact. Lucas nodded quiet. It was doing its job, I said, and they ripped it out. We uploaded everything to a shared drive. I labeled the new file Exhibit C, Preventable Sequence Breakdown. That evening, I sent it to 3 people: Teresa the engineer, Detective Morales, a friend of Greg's in the County Traffic Enforcement Unit, and the State Patrol Internal Affairs officer handling the injured sergeant's case. I included my statement typed in crisp legal language and a line that echoed in my chest long after I hit send. Had my warning sign remained in place, I have every reason, professional and personal, to believe this crash would not have occurred. The next week was a waiting game. Karen went quiet. The HOA stopped knocking. But I knew they weren't idle. Rumors started to circulate. One neighbor said he'd heard from his wife's Pilates instructor that I'd been reckless with homemade road equipment. Another claimed I was trying to sue the HOA for money. One evening, someone anonymously posted in the Meadow Glen community app that certain residents are exploiting tragedy for attention. I didn't respond. Instead, I filed a defamation warning notice with the HOA's own legal contact, citing the libelous comments circulating under their governance structure. I attached screenshots, timestamps, witnesses. Made it clear I'd pursue civil action if it continued. And then, just as I was preparing to bring the first formal complaint to the county court, something shifted. Greg called his voice sharp. "They're preparing countercharges," he said. "What kind?" "False claims, public nuisance, and obstruction of HOA duties. They want to bury you in court before you ever reach a judge." I laughed, but it was a dry, exhausted sound. "That means they're scared." "It means they're desperate," he corrected. "And that's good, because desperate people make mistakes." Lucas was in the garage that night, organizing the folders we'd printed for the coming battle evidence: sets, photos, letters, timelines. He held up Angela's original sign, cracked at the base, but still intact. We'd found it behind the HOA maintenance shed a week earlier, dumped like garbage. He looked at it for a long moment. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" he asked. I swallowed hard. I think she already is. We hung it on the wall, not as a warning anymore, but as a declaration. The next morning, I received a call from a man with a voice like gravel and iron. "This is Sergeant Matthew Keller," he said. "You left something for me, the footage." "Yes," I said. I reviewed it. "I've also been informed the HOA is attempting to place partial liability on your previous signage." He paused. "That won't happen." I stood frozen. "Excuse me?" "I don't forget who saves lives, Mr. Jennings, and I don't forgive people who gamble with them. I'm authoring a statement. Official. It'll go to your attorney." I couldn't speak. I just nodded into the silence. Before he hung up, he said one more thing. "Your wife's sign did its job until they decided it didn't matter." And with that, the tide began to turn. I hadn't seen Matt Keller in over a decade, not since we both walked out of a courthouse after testifying in a vehicular manslaughter trial that left us raw and silent for months. Back then, he was a fast-rising star in the State Patrol, the kind of guy who could talk down a standoff with nothing but a stare. And I was the guy beside him, the tech, the analyst, the one who rebuilt crash scenes from blood and broken glass. Angela hated that part of my job. She used to wait up for me on late nights, sitting on the couch with a blanket and 2 mugs of tea, one always going cold. "How many bodies tonight?" she'd ask softly. Not out of cruelty, out of love, out of worry. And I'd shrug and say, "Only 1 or none," or lie. After she died, I couldn't go back. I turned in my badge, boxed up my field kits, and focused on Lucas, who needed me more than the job ever did. So when Sergeant Keller called again and said, "I'm coming down," part of me tensed. That world, the one I'd stepped out of it, was back. And it wore a badge. He arrived 2 days later in a Navy windbreaker, limping slightly from the crash, but still every inch the steel-eyed man I remembered. His handshake was firm, his gaze even firmer. Lucas stood awkwardly in the doorway, watching us like a reunion he didn't quite know how to interpret. "You must be Lucas," Keller said. "You look like your mom." Lucas blinked. "You knew her." Keller nodded. "She was a good nurse. Pulled a shrapnel fragment out of my arm once during a domestic scene in Elko. Never forgot her." Lucas's face changed just a little, like something heavy shifted on his shoulders, and some small piece of pain became less lonely. We sat at the kitchen table. where my laptop was already open, with all the evidence folders queued up. Keller didn't waste time. He pulled out a notepad, a USB drive, and a departmental form with the State Patrol seal at the top. "I'm authoring this as a sworn witness statement," he said, "but I'm also making a referral to the County District Attorney's Office. The HOA Board's removal of a visible, functioning safety sign, especially after being informed of prior incidents, constitutes at minimum negligent endangerment." I stared at him. "You really think the DA will pursue it?" "I think they'll have to. Once this hits their desk, it's public, and public pressure is more persuasive than any statute." He scrolled through the footage, drone shots, dashcam footage, the HOA workers tearing down the sign the moment of the crash. "That's your timeline?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded. "Clean, provable, sequential, no gaps. Whoever helped you with this knows what they're doing." I smiled. "They used to be a damn good crash analyst." He looked up. "Used to be. I'm not going back, Matt." He didn't argue, he just kept working. When he left 3 hours later, the flash drive in his hand held everything: metadata, affidavits, witness statements. He promised to have his referral submitted by Monday. And with that, he was gone. That night, Lucas sat beside me in the garage. He was quiet, flipping through old photographs. Angela in the garden. Angela with a newborn Lucas. Angela standing beside the sign we built together one autumn, her hand resting on the post like she was blessing it. "Do you ever regret not suing the county?" he asked suddenly. I paused. "Sometimes." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want to fight anymore. I was tired. I thought if I just built the sign, if I just warned people, that would be enough." He nodded, but it wasn't. "No," I said, "not for the HOA." There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a small woman in her 60s, holding a manila envelope and trembling slightly. "Mr. Jennings?" she asked. "Yes." "My name is Donna Simmons. I live 2 streets over. My daughter crashed on that curve 4 years ago. She wasn't seriously hurt, but her car was totaled. I wrote a letter to the HOA, then asking for a mirror or sign. They never responded." She handed me the envelope. I kept copies, photos, the letter, her insurance report. I don't know if it helps, but I took it gently. "It does, thank you." After she left, I opened the envelope and found a copy of the same HOA response letter I'd received almost word for word. Cold, detached, prioritizing appearance over safety. I added it to the growing folder, Exhibit D, prior complaints ignored. Greg called that night. "They know what's coming," he said. I got word from an old buddy at the county clerk's office. Karen tried to pre-file a motion to dismiss any future liability claims tied to voluntary sign placement. And they rejected it. Procedural grounds. But more than that, she's scared. Good. Let her be. Let them all be. Because for once, I wasn't the one waiting to be punished. I was the one moving forward. The next morning, I got a call from the local news. A reporter named Cynthia Tran had caught wind of the crash and she wanted an interview. I hesitated. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you tried to stop it before it happened," she said. "And people need to know that." I agreed. That afternoon, she stood with her cameraman at the curved microphone in hand as I told Angela's story. I spoke plainly about the crash, the sign, the removal, the second wreck. About the HOA's refusal to listen. "Do you think they're responsible?" she asked. I looked into the camera. "I don't think," I said. "I know." The segment aired that evening. Karen's face was pixelated, but her voice wasn't. A clip from a board meeting, her dismissing my appeal with a shrug, played right after a quote from Keller's affidavit. The footage of the crash followed. The phone rang nonstop for the next 2 days. Neighbors, reporters, advocacy groups. One man from a nonprofit called Citizens for Road Equity wanted to feature our story in a regional campaign. But what meant most came from the people right here, Meadow Glen. They started talking. One by one, they spoke up. I had a near miss there last winter. My son flipped his bike and broke his collarbone. My mail carrier said she always slowed down near your sign. And so the truth began to gather mass, to pull weight, to shift gravity. I wasn't alone anymore. And neither was the truth. The real war didn't start with the crash or the removal of the sign. It started in the silence after the headlines faded, when HOA board members stopped returning emails, when Karen stopped smiling during her morning jogs past my driveway, when lawyers stopped writing with confidence and started responding with delay. That's when I knew they were retreating. Not surrendering. No, HOA boards don't surrender. But they were circling their wagons, hoping the noise would die down, that people would forget. I wasn't going to let them. The first step was simple. Trace the timeline. I opened a fresh legal pad, dated the top corner, and wrote a single word in capital letters: negligence. Under it, I sketched a vertical column of dates and events. 20. Angela's fatal crash, 2018. I installed the homemade warning sign. 2019 first neighbor complaint about the curve. 2000. County denies signage funding request. 2025. May, HOA orders sign removal. 2025. June 3rd, HOA removes the sign. 2025, June 3. 9:12 a.m. HOA vehicle crashes into State Patrol sedan. 2025, June 4th. HOA blames me. 2025, June 6th. Sergeant Keller initiates formal report. I stared at it for a long time. This was no longer about a post in the ground. It was a structure of the facts that pointed in one direction. I pulled out a folder and wrote across the front: People versus the Grove at Meadow Glen HOA. Then I went to work. I started with the paper trail. HOA board meeting minutes were public by law in this county. They weren't posted online, of course. That would be too transparent. But I requested them under the Sunshine Ordinance and walked into their office 2 days later with a copy of the statute in hand. The receptionist, a young woman with clear discomfort in her eyes, handed me a stack of printouts reluctantly. "You have 20 minutes," she said. I scanned the records for anything related to road safety signage policy traffic complaints. It didn't take long. On page 7 of a meeting held in August 2023, concerns were raised about the increasing number of vehicles entering the western curve of Red Pine Road at excessive speeds. The board discussed the potential for warning signage, but determined that HOA responsibility did not extend to county-maintained roads. Motion passed 4-1 to defer any formal signage installation pending county funding. They knew. They discussed it. They chose not to act. I copied it, filed it. Exhibit E. Knowledge of risk. Inaction documented. Next, I reached out to Teresa again, the civil engineer who'd been helping behind the scenes. She'd done her own independent assessment of the curve using drone footage and traffic flow modeling. I ran the numbers she said over the phone. That bend has a 63% higher risk factor than county average for 2-lane blind curves with limited shoulder visibility. That's with your sign present. Without it, it jumps to 85%. Would you sign that in a sworn statement? I already did, she said. I sent it to Sergeant Keller. Exhibit F, expert risk analysis. The story was coming together, but evidence wasn't enough. Not in cases like this. Not when the board could still claim procedural compliance, hiding behind policy the way children hide behind locked doors. So I went after a motive. I started talking to vendors. HOA contracts, service providers, construction companies. One man, a landscaper named Jermaine, who serviced the clubhouse, told me something that made my blood run cold. "They didn't like your sign," he said one morning as he trimmed shrubs near the HOA office. "Said it made the neighborhood look cheap. Karen said it was visually jarring." I remember because Brad laughed and said, "It's not a speed bump, it's a soapbox." That stuck with me. Soapbox. They didn't see the sign as safety. They saw it as defiance. They saw me as a threat. Back at home, Lucas and I combed through archived emails I'd saved, every notice, every violation threat, every friendly reminder about garbage bins, lawn height, or the unauthorized use of amber-colored lighting. Patterns emerged. They escalated shortly after Angela's memorial cross was installed by the curb. They increased again after I built a bench near the sign, a quiet spot where she used to drink her coffee. They weren't just enforcing rules, they were retaliating. I began drafting a civil complaint with help from an old paralegal friend of mine. She advised me on formatting local filing rules and the crucial step establishing bad faith. Negligence is one thing, she said. But if you can show they targeted you personally, that's malicious conduct. That's where real liability opens up. I added a new label. Exhibit G, pattern of targeted enforcement. But it wasn't all smooth. A week into the investigation, I received a formal notice taped to my garage door. Another fine, $750 this time. Violation of HOA Rule 14.1a, unauthorized use of external surveillance devices. They were referring to the dash cam facing the road, the same one that had recorded the crash. I laughed. I genuinely laughed, because it was such a pathetic, transparent move. They weren't hiding it anymore. I called their bluff. I didn't pay the fine. I submitted a public records request to determine whether any other residents had been cited under Rule 14.1a. The answer came back no. They were using the rules as weapons. And now I had proof. Greg met me that weekend and brought 2 heavy-duty file boxes. Inside everything from the original crash, Angela's crash. I thought you should have this, he said quietly. You never asked for it. But I kept it, just in case. Inside were photographs I hadn't seen. Angle diagrams. The full report one I'd never read in full because I couldn't bring myself to. It confirmed what I'd long suspected but couldn't prove before Angela had braked. Hard. She saw the curve too late, but she saw it. Just not early enough. The sign would have made the difference. Lucas and I stood in the garage for a long time that night, just holding each other. No words. Just the quiet pressure of a son and a father finally stepping out of grief and into war. Because this wasn't just about Angela anymore. This was about the people they'd ignored, the stories they buried, the pain they paved over with freshly cut lawns and policy manuals. And now they were about to find out what happens when the man they tried to silence refuses to stay buried. It started with a thick brown envelope dropped off at the HOA office on a Friday morning. Inside were 68 pages of hard evidence, timeline charts, sworn affidavits, drone images, expert analyses, HOA meeting minutes, and a signed letter from Sergeant Matthew Keller himself. The cover sheet read, Daniel Jennings versus The Grove at Meadow Glen HOA. Pre-litigation package, negligence, retaliation, and malicious conduct. By the time Karen Riston finished flipping through the first 20 pages, her hands were probably shaking. Because this time it wasn't just a grieving homeowner yelling into the void. This was formal, structured, ready for court. I filed the initial complaint the same morning at the county courthouse, Civil Division Window 3. The clerk, a tired woman in tortoise-shell glasses, raised an eyebrow when she saw the thickness of the file. Ho-oh trouble. Always, I said. She smiled without humor. You're the 4th one this month. Afterward, I drove to the sheriff's office to confirm the receipt of the crash footage and to deliver Teresa's signed affidavit on the curve's hazard rating. I didn't wear a suit, didn't dress like someone trying to impress a judge. I wore jeans and the same shirt I'd been wearing when they tore Angela's sign out of the ground, because I wanted to be me, the man they underestimated. By Monday, word had spread. The HOA board sent out a mass email to the entire community, and there have been recent developments involving a civil complaint by a resident. Please rest assured that the Grove at Meadow Glen HOA takes safety and community harmony very seriously. We are confident that the truth will prevail. Karen's signature at the bottom looked as smug as ever, but I knew the real reason they sent it, panic control. And it didn't work. 2 days later, Channel 7 News ran a follow-up on our story now with official statements from the County District Attorney's Office, confirming a review of potential civil violations is underway. They included a clip of Teresa standing beside the curve. No signage, no warning, just a death waiting to happen, she said into the mic voice, cool and calm. Then they cut to Keller. His face was harder, more surgical. I believe the crash was preventable. I believe the HOA had prior knowledge. And I believe Mr. Jennings was targeted for doing what the HOA refused to do, keep people safe. The next board meeting was standing room only. I didn't go, but Greg did. He sat in the back with a GoPro strapped to his chest and a stack of printed neighbor complaints. The moment Karen opened her mouth to read a pre-scripted statement, he raised his hand and said, Madam President, how many accidents do you need before you stop blaming the people trying to prevent them? They tried to cut the meeting short, but residents wouldn't let them. People started sharing their own stories, near misses on the curve, emails they sent that went unanswered, fines they felt were unfairly applied after minor disagreements with the board. One woman broke down crying when she recounted her teenage son skidding out on his bike near that same bend last winter. The HOA board realized something that night. Control only works when people stay quiet. But the community wasn't quiet anymore. The real reckoning came the following week, when my attorney Rachel Vance, a sharp-as-nails litigator from Raleigh, who'd taken an interest in my case pro bono, filed a motion for injunctive relief. The motion included a request to freeze all HOA discretionary spending until the case was resolved. It claimed that the board had knowingly used HOA funds to silence and retaliate against a resident who had acted in good faith to prevent harm. It also cited misuse of legal threats, suppression of evidence, and a pattern of intimidation tactics aimed at silencing public safety concerns. And it landed like a bomb. That same day I received a knock at the door. It was Brad Whitmore, the treasurer. He looked thinner, sweatier than the last time I saw him. He wasn't holding a clipboard this time, just a crumpled hat in both hands. "Daniel," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe. "About what?" He swallowed. "Look, I just want to say, none of us thought it would go this far. We were just following protocols. Karen was adamant about uniformity and—" "Do you remember laughing at my sign?" I asked. His mouth opened, closed. "You called it a soapbox." He looked down. "You helped strip down a warning that could have saved lives. Then you turned around and billed me for the labor. I didn't mean—" "You meant to protect your own. You meant to shut me up." He looked like he wanted to cry. "I didn't know it would end like this." "That's the problem, Brad. You didn't want to know." He left without saying another word. 3 days later, the board called an emergency vote. Not just within themselves, but a full HOA-wide ballot to determine whether to remove the current leadership and initiate a compliance audit by a third party. The email subject line was short: Special Referendum Board Confidence Vote. And the results came in fast. I wasn't surprised by the numbers. Karen Riston was ousted with 84% of the vote against her. Brad resigned before the results were even official. 2 other board members stepped down for personal reasons within 48 hours. In their place, a new interim board was appointed comprised of longtime residents, including a retired school principal, a civil engineer, and a single mom who ran the neighborhood watch. They sent me a letter. Not an HOA threat this time, but a personal letter hand-delivered. "Mr. Jennings, we acknowledge the harm caused by the actions of the previous board, and we are committed to making this community safer, fairer, and more accountable. The HOA will formally withdraw all past fines and assessments against your property, and will fund the installation of permanent road signage at the curve on Red Pine Road, consistent with state safety recommendations. In addition, we invite you to join our new Road Safety Committee as an honorary advisor." It wasn't a settlement. It wasn't hush money. It was something better: recognition, responsibility, change. Lucas and I stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun drop below the tree line. He looked older these days, wiser, a little more like me, which scared and comforted me at the same time. He nudged me. "You going to join that committee?" "I think so." "You think Mom would have believed all this?" I shook my head. "No, she'd have called it a Hallmark movie." He laughed. I didn't. Because it wasn't over. Not yet. But the tide had turned. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. The courtroom smelled like old wood and fresh nerves. It was the kind of space where every sound echoed too long, where even the squeak of your shoes on the floor felt like a mistake. The flags flanking the judge's bench stood stiff and unbending like silent witnesses who'd seen 100 lies before breakfast. And across the aisle from me, behind a polished oak table and a legal pad that would remain mostly untouched, sat the last remnants of the old HOA board. Karen Riston wore a blazer that tried too hard to look innocent. Brad Whitmore wasn't there, his name removed from the official defense after his resignation and private settlement. 2 of the remaining members stared at the floor as if avoiding eye contact might make the building collapse quietly around them. But this time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. My attorney, Rachel Vance, stood tall beside me in a charcoal gray suit that could slice paper. Her voice carried like it was cut from steel, calm, unflinching, and sharp. "This case is not about a sign," she began. "It's about deliberate indifference, about power wielded without care, about a homeowner who begged for safety, and an HOA board that saw his grief as an eyesore." The judge, a broad-shouldered woman named Marshall, didn't flinch. Her eyes tracked every word, her pen never stopped moving. Rachel continued. "For nearly 5 years, Mr. Jennings maintained a small handmade warning sign on a dangerous curve where his wife lost her life. It stood without complaint or conflict. Residents slowed down. Accidents dropped. Then, without any alternative safety measures, without community input, the HOA board ordered its removal. And within hours, there was a crash. A preventable crash. a life-altering crash. Karen shifted in her seat. Her attorney, a man who looked like he billed by the hour, even while sleeping, rose with the poise of someone used to arguments that leaned on technicalities. Your Honor, we don't dispute the facts of the accident, but the plaintiff cannot prove causality between the absence of an unauthorized sign and the collision in question. Furthermore, all actions taken by the board were within the scope of HOA enforcement policy and protected under municipal code. Blah, blah, blah. Legal paint over moral rot. But Rachel had been ready. She clicked a remote and the projection screen behind the judge flickered to life. Video footage from the dashcam of Sergeant Keller's vehicle played. The curve approached fast, the angle sharper than it looked on paper. No signage, no caution, no warning. Then impact. The sound was awful. Karen winced. One of the former board members muttered something and looked away. Rachel spoke over the silence that followed. The board removed a known safety measure without replacing it. They knew the curve was dangerous. They had prior complaints, and yet they chose to prioritize visual uniformity over human life. She clicked again. Now drone footage filled the screen side by side, comparisons of the curve with the sign in place and without. The contrast was striking. Visibility dropped. Time to react was cut in half. Then came the documents. Exhibit A, the original complaint from 2018 after Angela's death. Exhibit B, the board's minutes dismissing requests for signage. Exhibit C, HOA policy, contradicting itself about road jurisdiction. Exhibit D, the removal order signed by Karen Riston time-stamped just hours before the crash. Exhibit E, Keller's sworn statement read aloud with his full rank and credentials. And finally, Exhibit F, the flash drive. Rachel handed it to the court clerk who loaded it into the system. This contains the full documentation timeline prepared by Mr. Jennings and reviewed by traffic investigators. It demonstrates not just negligence, but motive. The board did not act out of ignorance. They acted out of spite, because Mr. Jennings dared to remind them they were fallible. The video played an overlay of email timestamps, map data, crash metrics, and a digital reenactment that showed how the presence of the original sign would have prevented the impact entirely. Judge Marshall leaned forward. Her pen stopped moving. "Is this analysis peer-reviewed?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel replied. "It was conducted by retired State Patrol crash analyst Gregory Martinez and civil engineer Teresa Way, both of whom have submitted expert affidavits under penalty of perjury." Karen's attorney stood again. "Even so, Your Honor, the HOA cannot be held liable for accidents that occur on county roads. The sign in question was illegal. Mr. Jennings had no authority. That's the difference," Rachel cut in. "He took responsibility when the HOA wouldn't. He warned drivers when you removed the warnings. And now you want to punish him for doing your job better than you ever did." There was a hush in the room that felt like thunder with its hands in its pockets. The judge called a recess. Outside the courtroom, Lucas stood waiting with Greg and Teresa. His hands were clenched, but his shoulders weren't hunched like they used to be. He was holding himself tall, like someone who knew what justice looked like and what it cost. "How's it going?" he asked. I smiled, better than I expected. We sat on a stone bench outside the courthouse, the same one where Angela and I had once eaten lunch during a jury duty week long ago. I looked at the old building's sandstone walls, the tired flag, the creeping ivy that seemed to grow in slow defiance of the structure's rigidity. Lucas spoke first. "Whatever happens, you did it right." I nodded. "It's not just about being right, it's about making it count." When court resumed, the judge didn't delay. She spoke clearly, decisively. "This court finds sufficient evidence of gross negligence and a consistent pattern of retaliatory conduct on behalf of the Grove at Meadow Glen HOA board. The motion to dismiss is denied. The plaintiff's case may proceed to full trial or negotiated settlement." The room shifted. You could feel the air come back into people's lungs. Karen's attorney asked for a sidebar. 5 minutes later, the judge returned. "A settlement has been proposed." Rachel leaned toward me. "It's fair and binding." The terms were read aloud. On the HOA would pay full damages for legal costs and community safety upgrades. A public apology would be issued to me and Sergeant Keller. Permanent professionally installed signage would be added to the curve, with both county and state oversight. A new oversight committee, including independent safety advisors, would monitor HOA enforcement going forward. And finally, all retaliatory fines, penalties, and citations against me would be rescinded. The judge nodded. This court accepts the terms. Karen didn't look at me. Not once. But that was fine, because her power had come from silence, and that silence had been broken. As we stepped out of the courthouse, a light breeze picked up. The kind Angela always said felt like the wind checking in on us. Lucas put his arm around my shoulder. "What now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we make sure this never happens to anyone else." 2 weeks after the court approved the settlement, a flatbed truck rolled up to the curve on Red Pine Road. It carried something I'd never thought I'd see: a professional reflective double-posted warning sign designed to withstand weather, vandalism, and time. At the top, in bold black letters, "Dangerous, curve, reduce speed." Below it, a yellow caution plaque with the silhouette of the bend, its angle unmistakable. They installed it right where mine used to be. Only this time, it wasn't something hammered into the dirt by a grieving husband in the half-light. It was regulation certified, county endorsed, paid for by the very HOA that once tried to bury my voice. The same HOA that now had a new board, new bylaws, and a new reputation to rebuild. I stood on the shoulder watching the workers bolt it into place. Lucas was next to me holding a thermos of coffee, his face still and unreadable. "They did it," he finally said. "We did it," I corrected him. One of the installation techs approached us when the job was done. A younger guy, maybe late 20s, but with an old face and kind eyes. He handed me a document, formal confirmation of placement and compliance under county code. Then he hesitated. "You're the one who lost your wife here, right?" I nodded slowly. He looked back at the sign. "I think it'll help." "I know it will," I said. He offered a respectful nod and left us alone. Lucas and I stood in silence a little longer. The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying that particular whisper only a father and son can hear when a memory is stronger than the moment. And then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed something. An older woman walking her dog along the opposite sidewalk paused at the sign. She read it, looked up at the curve, and gave a little nod to herself before adjusting her grip on the leash and continuing on. Just a small thing, barely a moment. But it meant everything. We walked back toward the house, and on the way Lucas asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you think Mom would have forgiven them?" I exhaled slowly. "I think she would have tried. That's the difference between her and me." He nodded, thoughtful. "I'm somewhere in the middle." I smiled. "That's probably the right place to be." Back home, we entered through the garage where her old garden bench still sat beneath the pegboard wall. The cracked wooden sign that started it all was now framed above it, a plaque beneath it that Lucas had engraved for my birthday. "In memory of Angela Jennings, a sign of love, a warning, a stand." There were other changes too. The Road Safety Committee invited me to serve not just as an advisor, but as its founding chair. I accepted, but on one condition: that they open it to everyone in the neighborhood, not just HOA members. No red tape, no politics, just voices. We met twice a month. We walked the streets together. We logged visibility blind spots, cracked sidewalks, burned out lamps. And when the HOA sent a representative to review our authority, the new board president, Judith, a retired school principal with the heart of a lion, handed them a signed petition of 76 households backing the committee's right to exist. When they didn't respond, we installed our own crosswalk signs anyway. They haven't challenged us since. And as for Karen, she's gone. Moved to a condo 3 towns over. Last I heard, she's trying to run for a seat on their planning commission. Let them figure her out. Brad, to his credit, sent me a letter, handwritten, apologizing, owning it, saying he should have listened, should have stood up. He ended it simply: "You were right. I was scared. And I hope you find peace." I wrote back. Just 2 words. I already have. Peace, it turns out, isn't a finish line. It's a daily practice. It's coffee on the porch without expecting an HOA notice in the mailbox. It's Lucas walking home from school, rounding that curve at the end of our road without looking over his shoulder. It's knowing that Angela's name still means something, not because of how she died, but because of what came after. We dedicated the sign in her honor. The board approved a small plaque at the base, embedded in the concrete with bronze lettering. This safety installation is dedicated to Angela Jennings, who lost her life on this road. May her memory keep others safe. People pause when they walk past it now. They leave little notes sometimes. A rose, a stone, a child's drawing. I don't remove them, because this isn't just my story anymore. It belongs to the neighborhood now. To the people who drive safer, walk smarter, speak louder. HOAs were never supposed to be kingdoms. They were meant to be communities. And when one forgets that it takes just one person to remind them, sometimes that reminder is a voice. Sometimes it's a lawsuit. Sometimes it's a sign. But always, it starts with someone refusing to be quiet.